Guys, I want to talk about AEW All In and the ticket sales. And I was just watching off the Mike's Sports Network, and he was talking about it, and I do agree with what he said that obviously, the ticket sales are not that good. They're at 18,000 out of 42,000 people. And then the other thing too is that I believe with Global Life Field, there's been reports that it goes up to 50,000. So when I've looked at it, I've kind of said, okay, the maximum capacity is 50,000, and they sold 18,000 tickets, so that's roughly 36% on a test, and that's usually the best way to look at it because if they were able to do maximum capacity at 50,000, you know, that's amazing, and that should be the goal really to always max it out. But I do want to mention that there are a lot of reasons why they are not selling tickets, and I want to go over them. That the first thing is that they don't care about storytelling. I think there's a lot of planting of seeds. And what I mean by this is that the main story that they're telling very well right now is Hangman Adam Page and if people are going to help him out. Like, who is anybody gonna is the cowboy gonna walk alone, or is the cowboy gonna have that posse help him out? Really, that's kind of like, is he gonna be the Lone Ranger at high noon, or is it gonna be like Lord of the Rings where he's gonna be a small group of people and have all these armies help him out? Really, that's the only story that they're telling well. And the second story that they're doing is Tony Storm and Mercedes Moné, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense, really, because it's really just about Tony Storm saying about, you're not going to treat me like an afterthought. You are materialistic, and we're going to have the best match ever, really. So there is some. So it's not a good story, but you could do more saying materialism. A person holding a title for materialism versus a person who's holding a title to have the best matches, really. I care about having a championship to collect belts. I care about a championship for, the heart of the battle, really. That's really the story, really. And then Kenny Omega and Okada, there's really no story outside of a rematch, and it's also a bit of a revenge story from, how much Okada has been mistreating Kenny Omega, really, but that's not been done that well. So the three stories, and then even when you look at Hangman, it's tied in with John Moxley, and the Death Riders have not been a good storyline. So there is a lot of just, none of the stories are actually that even passable to me. So those are the issues, but there's other stories that they can be telling. Number one is Anthony Bowens versus Max Caster. Another story could be, Athena versus Thunder Rosa, and Thunder Rosa has been on a losing streak. She wants to win a title. She wants a big moment for herself, because Texas is close to Mexico. She wants a big moment for the Mexican people. So, and Athena's close to 1,000 days, really, and it's almost like what has she been doing? And a lot of people don't. And I've known people who don't know that she's actually wrestles for AEW, really. So there could be a story there. The next thing could be like Mystico versus MJF, Mash versus Hair. There could be a story of, like I said, like Dustin Rhodes for the ROH Championship. If you were to do Dustin and Chris Jericho, the old man who wants that one last shot at glory versus, the asshole and Chris Jericho. That's a good story. Another story could be, you could have built the Outrunners very, very strongly, and you could have said, okay, they want to take on the Hurt Syndicate. So it's ultimately, over time, they're learning not to be a joke team to being a serious team. So, a story about, maturity. There's also a story, that you can do with Kyle Fletcher and Adam Cole and be like, okay, well, Adam Cole is injury prone. He doesn't deserve to be champion. Everybody kisses his ass, really. And you look at how much Kyle Fletcher has grinded. He's not won a championship in AEW. It's Kyle's time, really. So ultimately, the entitled jackass versus, the person that probably got the opportunity because he is actually, good. Also, another thing you can do is like Ricochet and Crew joining forces, and they take on Dustin and the Von Erichs. Because Ricochet's been about wanting to win a singles title, And now he wants to have form a faction because he realizes that factions are good in AEW. So this is kind of like their test run. Another story that they can do is, I'm just thinking to myself, is like, you can also do, like, as some people say, you can take Okada and Konosuke Takashita and turn that into something. You can do a story where Billy Starks is in the women's casino gauntlet, and she's like this underdog wrestler unsure of herself, and she kind of has a great performance. So there's just like a lot of stories that are on the table right now that they can really tell, but they're not really doing anything with it. So that's been their big issue. Another big issue that they have is planting seeds. And planting seeds just means that you're hinting at stories, but you're not moving forward with them. Like, for example, like Kyle Fletcher has been attacking Adam Cole a lot, so that's going to lead to a match. But what if they had decided to have a feud and a storyline a few weeks ago? What would happen if you did something like you just had AEW Grand Slam Mexico? A lot of the luchadors should be pissed off with MJF for attacking Mystico. What would happen if you did something like you said something like, okay, MJF got assaulted. What would happen if you saw him in the hotel room and he's all bloody, but you found out it's actually Dorado or Mystico or Hologram, and you set up a match with them at AEW, at AEW, All In. So, and then another thing is that Anthony Bowens was kind of like pissy at Billy Gunn. What would happen if he did a retirement match? So there's a lot of these things that happen, which is planting seeds. That means like you're hinting at matches, you're foreshadowing, but you're not pulling the trigger on building a feud, and that's not good really, because ultimately, imagine if you had Anthony Bowens and Max Caster, and they just had a bunch of fights and they had a bunch of matches. Or Max Caster's going to go after the Ring of Honor championship, and then he actually loses to Bandito. He gets close to being Bandito by cheating, and then Anthony Bowens screws him over. Or what would happen if John Moxley talked about people trying to prove themselves, and Anthony Bowens decides to have a match and be like, okay, you know what, I want it all really, and Moxley's saying, I appreciate your potential, and then what happens is Max Caster beats the shit out of him backstage really, and all that stuff really. There's no sense of a feud is when it's going to go in a certain direction, but you build a storyline, you build and people know that the match is going to happen really, and AEW doesn't do that. For example, with Batista and Triple H, the reason why that match worked so well is because you saw Batista attack Ric Flair. So when you did that, there were people okay, now we know this match is going to happen. Or with John Cena turning heel at the Elimination Chamber, you didn't plant seeds. You said, okay, we're going to do a big moment, and now we're going to lead to a big match, really. And that's what they got to do in AEW. They don't do that. So there's a lot of just planting seeds, which means, okay, this can happen, but we're not planning a feud. The last thing that I will say is that one of their biggest issues is way too many special shows. You had Fyter Fest in Denver. You did a Fyter Fest, I believe, in Portland, Maine. You did Grand Slam in Mexico. And now in 2 weeks, you're doing a 4-hour show in Ontario, California. So it's almost like, and then you also have a 5th show, which is Super Card of Honor. So it's almost like, how are you using these shows to build other matches and stories? Like I've said before, Nick Wayne should be facing Bandito at Super Card of Honor. People should know about this. And then what you do is that you actually have Bandito beat Nick Wayne, really, and then you could have Christian Cage beat Nick Wayne with a belt. His mother just defends her son, really. He hits her, saying, okay, you know what, you're being too soft. Women are too soft, really, on their kids, really. Nick Wayne gets mad, snaps, and then he and Christian have a fight together. Or they have a fight, and Nick Wayne and Christian kind of say, okay, we had a match, we kicked each other's asses, but we're going to just drink a beer, really, and just get over it, and we're going to be a tag team, really. You see what I'm trying to say? You're using big shows to bleed to other matches. You do something like AEW, CMLL, CMLL versus ROH, and AEW, and you say to yourself, hey, Thunder Rosa got a big pop. Hey, Athena got a big pop. Hey, Bandito, Dorado, Mascara Dorado, Hologram, they all got some big pops. Mystico versus MJF got a big pop. You can set up a revenge match between MJF and Mystico. So why are you not like looking at what's happening on these shows and the reactions and building to matches? Because right over, you're very hot with the Mexican crowd. So why not do some matches that are gonna make them happy, like Thunder Rosa versus Athena, or Mystico versus MJF, hair versus mask, or what if you had Mystico, Hologram, and Mascara Dorado take on the Hurt Syndicate? MJF, Shelton Benjamin, and Bobby Lashley. And if they win the match, if Hurt Syndicate wins, then MJF is a Freebird champion, meaning that he counts as a tag team champion. You know, that those all could be all good matches. So you're not having these shows, and you're not saying, hey, this is something that works. We can lead to a match. There's a story we can tell, really. The next thing that you're not doing is when you have a lot of these special shows, you're throwing everything onto these shows, and you are like, okay, well, instead of like pay-per-view matches, we're going to do these on these shows. Like, for example, you had Ricochet versus Will Ospreay last year, and that popped a rating, but then you're like, okay, what if you build to Ricochet versus Ospreay at All In, really? Or they've actually fought each other like 4 or 5 times, really. Anthony Bones versus Max Caster, you did a retarded thing where you had them have a match at AEW, like the Philadelphia show, at Dynasty, and then you said, oh, well, we're going to have to do a squash match. Well, that should have been like, a street fight, that should have been a street fight in Philadelphia. That should have been a Los Angeles street fight, or that should have been a match at AEW, All In, really. There's also many times, like I said, Will Ospreay should be like a Roman Gladiator. He should not be having matches on television, only on special shows, really, or even like some limited special shows, because it's like, why should he be having matches on regular television when he does such a great job? Make people pay to see that. So when you do too many special shows, you throw all the dream matches onto these shows. Sometimes you're more focused on making these all like these blockbuster shows for ratings, and ultimately, they take away matches, or they don't say, hey, this is working on our show. This can be something. Let's have a match at AEW All In with this. Like Harley Cameron and Anna Jay got over. So what would happen if they decide to have a match at AEW All In for the women's tag team title? Say, hey, this has some fire, really. You gave Holly Cameron like a Cody Rhodes, mask and whatever, and then they have a match. They set up a tournament, the next couple of weeks, and then you say, hey, we're going to actually have women tag team tournament, or something like that, really. Or like Thunder Rosa wants an opportunity to be a champion. What happens if you have a match between her and Athena, and you have Athena lose, or you have Thunder Rosa lose, and then you say, okay, well, the winner of that match is going to be in the women's casino gauntlet match, and then they're going to either make it a triple threat between Toni Storm and Mercedes, or they do something like Mercedes loses, and then they say, I want to take the TBS title off of you, and that could lead to something. So there's really not like a good usage of tie-ins where, you have something on these blockbuster shows that works, and then you say, hey, we're going to lead to these matches, this match or that match at All In, and then we're also going to do something like say, hey, let's make a story out of the next shows. Let's build like a story arc. And then also, like I said, if you have way too many special shows and way too many blockbusters, you put all the matches that should be on All In on these shows. And then the other thing, too, is you fatigue the audience, because 4 hours, 2.5 hours with Grand Slam Mexico, and then next week you're doing a 4-hour show, and then you also have a pay-per-view, Ring of Honor pay-per-view on the night before All In, really. It's just too much fatigue, really. So, like I said, I think the low ticket sales comes from a lot of bad booking, a lot of bad strategies, really. So AEW really has to get its shit together. It's like, as I said, I think that the talent is there, but they really need to start firing the bookers, and they also really need to listen to people like me, who, like I said, if I was booking AEW, I'll be making that bitch, so much money, So, hire. So, Tony Khan, nigga, you need to hire.